All right, as the nation mourns the passing away of one of its tallest leaders, Atal ji, I am being joined on the phone line by a very special guest, somebody who served under his prime ministership and somebody who's had a very, very close bond with him. Yashwant Sinha joins us right here on ET now. Mr. Sinha, my condolences, and I must pay them to you for being a colleague of Mr. Vajpayee and for being a part of his cabinet. And we all joined the mourning away, the passing away of Mr. Vajpayee. But I still think he was a man par excellence, somebody whose legacy really lives on. And I must begin by talking to you about not just his political legacy, where there is going to be so much written and talked about, but his economic legacy as well. And as somebody who served as finance minister under him, you obviously were up close, personal, and you had a first-hand information on his economic outlook, on his economic legacy. Many people believe the Golden Quadrilateral, the connectivity, the NTP, divestment, privatization, his lasting legacy really. Mr. Sinha.
Yes, Supriya, first of all, thank you very much for your condolences. There is no doubt that Mr. Vajpayee has left behind a very, very significant legacy as far as the economy of India is concerned. And you have named a few of them. I would like to remind you that it was not achieved under the best of circumstances. You, I'm sure, are aware that when Mr. Vajpayee became Prime Minister and I became his Finance Minister in the March of 1998, there was the East Asian crisis, which was literally raging in our backyard. And it had a very harmful impact on our economy. So as we were getting ready to tackle that crisis, we went for the nuclear test, which led to economic sanctions from almost all major countries of the world, and completely ruined the sentiment as far as India was concerned. I mean, the world started losing faith in our capacity to be able to overcome the sanctions. And you will also recall that we came out with the Resurgent India bonds in the August of 1998, where we ended up collecting over $4 billion from the non-resident Indians. Hello? Hello?
Right. I can hear you, sir. Go ahead. Yes. I can go ahead. I can hear you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Sinha.
Hello?
Mr. Sinha, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So, you know, the point I was making was that we faced that situation boldly. Mr. Vajpayee wanted us to face that situation boldly, and then we started step by step to overcome not only the challenges, but also take initiative in various fields to ensure that the country moved forward. And many of them are initiatives that you have named. But I remember my first meeting with him with regard to the budget of 1998. I went to him right in the beginning and said, what is your guidance for this budget? And he said, please do something for the farmers of this country. And next time when I went to him, I had gone with a proposal, among other things, to start the scheme of the Kisan credit card for the farmers of India. And he was very happy that we had thought of this particular device to help finance Indian agriculture. And then I made that announcement in the budget, and there were occasions where Mr. Vajpayee, taking personal interest in this matter, appeared personally at many functions to distribute the Kisan credit card to the farmers of the country. So, yeah. So,
no, Mr. Sinha, right. Mr. Sinha, if I may just intervene, I think between you and him, you could achieve a lot financially, a lot economically, and which is why I started off by saying that Mr. Vajpayee's lasting legacy is not just the politicians or the poets or the consensus maker, but also economically speaking. perhaps assisted by someone as able as you. But I still want to ask you this question. You know, he set up a divestment ministry. He went in for big ticket privatization. You have yourself said you handled the Asian crisis. I am privy to conversations where, the central bank governor was then not very happy with the rupee's appreciation being talked about, and Mr. Vajpayee held a meeting with the senior colleagues and said, let's not talk up the rupee, let's not talk about the strength of the rupee, let the central bank do the job. So he was pragmatic in that sense. But what gave him the courage or the conviction to go ahead with what now appear to be politically very explosive, very difficult decisions? 30 strategic sales is what he did in his entire tenure of 5 years. And this, when he was running a consensus government, he wasn't running an absolute majority government. He could still go ahead and do that. How did he arrive at that consensus? How tough was it to convince the allies to be on board? Because in 1999, to privatize PSUs wasn't an easy task, was it?
No, it was not. And let me tell you that Mr. Vajpayee was a consensus builder, not only with his allies, but also within the party. I'd like to mention to you the insurance bill where we decided to allow private parties to come into the field of insurance. I had Mr. Vajpayee's backing to go for it, but the rest of the cabinet was not with us on that. And when I took the proposal to the cabinet, there were very many important voices which said this was against the policy of the BJP, and therefore it should be rejected, the proposal. And Mr. Vajpayee saw the merit of the proposal that I had taken to the cabinet, and at the end of the discussion, he allowed everyone to speak. And at the end of it, he said he will appoint a group of ministers under Yashwant Sinha to look at the proposals in greater detail. And that's exactly what happened. The group of ministers had just one meeting, and we recommended the bill to the cabinet again. I took it back to the cabinet with the group of ministers' recommendations, and it was immediately adopted. So that was entirely because he was able to build consensus. He had a way of tackling difficult issues. So whether it was privatization or it was reforms, he would always hold sway. The most difficult, of course, were some of these popular issues like subsidies, food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy. These were more difficult areas, and there I must admit to you that we did not always succeed. We had to roll back at times.
That I can imagine that.
We made.
Yes.
So, but
no, I can imagine that, especially given the fact and the background that he came from. Yes. But
yes,
Mr. Sinha, because you've served in his cabinet, I must ask you this question. I have a question for you, Mr. Sinha. You served as his finance minister. We had Mr. Suresh Prabhu as his power minister. We had Arun Shauri as his divestment minister. There was a separate ministry of divestment that he set up. Pramod Mahajan was was seen as a high performer in his ministry. He was then holding the telecom portfolio. In some sense, and a lot of the commentators that we are talking to do say that his style of functioning was very different. He delegated a lot to his ministers, empowered them and trusted in their decisions. He gave you counsel, he gave you advice, but he let you make the decisions. Was that what demarcates Mr. Vajpayee from a lot of the other prime ministers, despite the fact that, he wasn't a technocrat, he was a generalist? The fact that he could let ministers be empowered and he could delegate is a sign of a secure leader?
Yes, Supriya, that came out of the enormous self-confidence that Mr. Vajpayee had in himself. He was never felt threatened by anyone. And therefore he could trust his cabinet colleagues. Therefore he could give them the space they wanted to be able to function effectively in their respective ministries. And it was this again which was responsible for his picking up a team of very competent people who were able to deliver under his guidance. So like all leaders who have spent long years in public life, have risen to the top from below, he had an uncanny sense of what was good for the country, what was needed for the country, and that was the broad guidance that he provided. He would not come and call me and tell me that India needed a fiscal responsibility and budget management act, and why don't you prepare it? But he had given me enough authority to think about these things, and when I came to a conclusion, I could go to him and say, this is what I think should be done, and he would immediately agree. I mean, you are aware of the fact that in our system, a finance minister cannot be effective until he enjoys the complete confidence of the prime minister. So there are many occasions where I was able to get a proposal through the cabinet because of the support that he lent.
No, absolutely. I don't deny that at all. I mean, we've seen that combination work for P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, with you and Mr. Vajpayee, with Mr. Chidambaram and Dr. Manmohan Singh. So that, the Prime Minister has to have absolute confidence and trust in his Finance Minister, and that is how you see the relationship flourish. You're absolutely right. He picked up a bunch of eminent, able people, and then he entrusted them. He delegated them. He did not centralize power. But, I have to just move away for a second away from the economy and still talk to you about the nuclear test that happened under him. India faced sanctions, we faced isolationism, and even then we could embark on this great journey with the United States. He was relentless in his pursuit to find some kind of peace, to find some kind of solace with our neighbors in Pakistan, whether it's the Lahore bus journey that he undertook or whether it was the Agra summit. He really was relentless. It wasn't just a show of pretense, but he did want peace with our neighbors. And eventually that wasn't to come by.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He had his goals clearly set. He wanted a good relationship, a very cordial relationship with the U.S. That relationship, in whatever form it existed, was threatened by the nuclear tests, and we really had to work very hard to be able to convince the Americans that the nuclear tests were in our best national interest. Kargil was a huge test of his diplomacy, where he achieved excellent results, despite the fact that he did not kowtow to anyone. And, he, even as far as sanctions were concerned, his instruction to us was that we will meet the sanctions headlong, frontally. We are not going to ask countries which have sanctioned us to lift the sanctions. We'll wait for the time when they themselves will feel that it is hurting them more than it is hurting us. And that was the overall direction under which we worked. And I'm glad to say today that we did not go with our pleas to any country. We met them, we made them understand the compulsions which made us carry out nuclear tests, but they themselves realized that they could not do without India, and they had huge respect for Mr. Vajpayee's leadership, and that is what ultimately proved to be to our great advantage. So, he was not only respected in India, I've seen personally that he was highly respected by the world leaders.
Indeed. I have a quick question to ask of you, and this is a little bit of a politically uncomfortable question. He unquestionably led the BJP to its first victory in national elections. He established the party's credentials to run a government, and still in many ways, he also resolutely held the BJP to a more central position. He did not let the BJP be pulled into an extreme right of the political spectrum. Is that also one of his lasting legacies?
It is a very important lasting legacy that he just refused to toe the the extremist line, both in politics as well as in the economy. I mean, in the economy, I can tell you without fear of contradiction that whenever he felt that maybe I was under pressure to do something from quarters that everyone knows about, he would call me and tell me I shouldn't do that, and that I should not come under pressure. And that gave me enormous amount of self-confidence in doing what I was trying to do. So therefore, take Swadeshi, for instance. There was a time when the Sangh Parivar was very unhappy with me because they thought that I had departed from the Swadeshi line. But Mr. Vajpayee and I were quite clear that India had to be made strong in order to follow the Swadeshi line. It could not do so by being a weak country dependent on the doles of the others.
No, that's exactly. I was just going to ask you that point. That was Mr. Vajpayee more deft in dealing with the Swadeshi lobby because he was the one who originally, took forward the Narasimha Rao Manmohan Singh combined liberalization forward. He did not shy away from FDI. So in some sense, he could deftly deal with the Swadeshi lobby. But a last question, in fact, two questions, and if I'll request you to be a little brief on this, was Vajpayee perhaps the absolutely right Prime Minister in a coalition era politics? His ability to speak to allies, his moral authority, his command over language, his ability to walk across the aisle, speak to opposition, get them on board. I mean, his famous interviews about Rajiv Gandhi sending him for treatment overseas or putting the Jawaharlal Nehru portrait back in the parliament corridors, in some sense tells you the ability of a man who could take people along. And in some sense, was he perhaps the absolutely right man at the right time in India's political history? Coalition era politics, you needed a man like him.
Nobody else could have done that job, and he was absolutely the right man, as you said, for coalition politics. He was a great consensus builder. He believed in taking people along. I remember some very difficult moments in the Ministry of Finance, where it was his guidance and his consensus building which won the day. Otherwise, we would not have been able to achieve what we had set out to achieve. So, he had a way of convincing people which very few people possess that particular quality, and he had it in plenty. And therefore, he was trusted by all the allies. It was give and take on many occasions, but it was without any sense of loss, especially of prestige, because everyone knew that Vajpayee was a great consensus builder. So, he was clearly the right man for the right job at that point of time.
Mr. Sinha, I know it's an emotional moment for you, and I think the passing away of a leader of his stature is not just an emotional moment for you alone personally, but I think for a country. But given the lasting legacy Mr. Vajpayee leaves behind, given a very fruitful life that he led and the great impression that he leaves behind on Indian politics, I can't let you go without asking you, what would your lasting impression of Atalji be from the many poems that he recited, whether it was Kaal Ke Kapal Pe, whether it was Phir Laut Ke Aata Hoon? Which are the two lines that come to your mind as we call it a day on this interaction, sir?
That Kaal Ke Kapal Par Raad Nahi, that was the poetry which I found to be most effective, and it clearly expresses his personality through his poems.
On that note, sir, we deeply join you in mourning Mr. Vajpayee's passing away. The nation stands with you, the family, and all his well-wishers. Thanks very much for sparing time and being with us on ET Now as we discuss the everlasting legacy of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the three-time Prime Minister of this country, a great consensus builder, a poet, a parliamentarian, and perhaps the last of the terror of Indian politics. We take a quick breather. There's plenty of news, views and analysis that continues right here on ET Now. We continue to track the final journey, the lasting legacy, and of course everything else connected with Atal Bihari Vajpayee.